For this one, it's for the existentialism. As the picture shows, this reminds me of a song of "Hello Darkness, My Old Friend." So when you have the existential crisis, look at the hamster's face. It's there. It says it all. So let's talk about existentialism let's try to dig in some histories in it and dig in some information of what came about perhaps or what happened during this time. So existentialism is a form of philosophical inquiry that explores the nature of existence. Nature of existence by emphasizing experience of human subject, not merely the thinking subject, but the acting, feeling, and living human individual. Existentialism stressed the meaning of human existence, freedom of choice, and the uniqueness of individuals. For the existentialists, the most important aspects of humans are their personal, subjective interpretations of life, and the choices that make in light of those interpretations. Like romanticists, existentialists viewed personal experience and feeling as the most valid guide to one's behavior. Although it's possible to trace the existential philosophy at least as far back as Socrates, who embraced the Delphic dictate, know thyself, and said, an examined life is not worth living. One of the first modern existentialists or existential philosophers was Soren Kierkegaard. Now, Soren Kierkegaard is a Danish theologian and philosopher. He was the youngest child of a large family, but his older brother were the only him and his older brother were the only ones to survive. His father, who was 56 when Soren was born, was prosperous and God-fearing merchant. Soren's mother was his father's servant before he made her his second wife. So Soren said very little about his mother. His father was a stern teacher also of religion. And for many years, Soren equated his father with God. It caused the great earthquake when in 1835, I think, Soren's father confessed to sexual excesses. And Soren responded by rebelling against both his father and religion. So when he found out about, some truth or personal information about his father, he sort of like rebelled it through his father and religion. He accepted both back into his heart eventually on his 25th birthday, which caused him to experience indescribable joy. His father died shortly afterwards, leaving him a substantial fortune. So, he left him a lot of money. In deference to his father's wishes, Soren began a serious study of theology, although he never became a minister. They came from a religious background kind of family. He authored 22 books, and 3 still continue to make his name. He was wealthy from the family in Copenhagen. When he was 22 years old, most of his siblings died, except for him and his brother, and he lived until 42 and died with a painful spinal disease. So the only survivors there were a lot of siblings that he has, but only 2 survived, him and his older brother. Let's move here. Now, it was against the Danish chapel and the bourgeoisie or the wealthy or elite. You call it. So it's pronounced as bourgeoisie. In French, it's called bourgeoisie or bourgeoisie. Now, another perspective that the marriage was killing the love. So he um, he systematically attacks the pillars of modern life: faith and family, trust and work, and attachment to love, and general sense that life has its purpose and meaning. At the University of Copenhagen, Kierkegaard studied first theology and then literature and philosophy. He had no financial worries and lived a carefree life. He mocked the notion that no one could ever fuse the love with romantic or having sensual desires at the same time having a family. So for him, it wasn't, having a love affair on the other side with all the sexual indulgences there. And on the other side, he sort of divided it. And the other side, being married, having family. For him, he could not find the balance of it and would find it impossible to balance even, and having such the family or having the family and the partner, which includes the love affair and the sexual desires in it. So for him, it's two separate entities or two separate things that could happen but could not happen in one entity. So he was in love with an 18-year-old girl, talented girl, her name rather was Regina Olsen, whom he had known for several years. To marry him after 2-year engagement, Kierkegaard felt that there was a divine protest. Deep inside him, there was a divine protest because the wedding was based on something untrue. He never said what, and in 1841, he wrote asking her to return the engagement ring. So, ouch! That was kind of like love story there. He was asking back for the ring. So, another perspective of that marriage was killing the love that drawn him to her. So, for him, if you go into that marriage or sanctity of matrimony, it will kill the love that he sort of perceived with that specific person. And if and when that they get married, the love would be gone or would disappear. It was a dilemma for him, to get married. Like for him, to get married will be a great regret. But not to get married will also be a great regret. So, it's like, when you eat a pizza, you finish the whole box of it, you regret and count the calories in it. But if you don't eat that urge of craving rather of pizza, you still regret of not eating the pizza. So it's sort of a dilemma for him. He thought that the ultimate response to his life horrors was to laugh at it defiantly. So for him, it was to counteract such life's horrors, is just suddenly laugh or give a laugh out of it. In his later life, he would influence Sartre. The spelling is Sartre, but we call it Sartre. Spelling is Camus, but we can call it, since French is Camus. So it's Sartre, Camus, and Heidegger. The book that gave them interest was published, called The Concept of Anxiety, which emphasized the new word angst or angst. So back to his love story. So it was a time of terrible suffering. To have this so cruel, at the same time, love as I did. She fought like a tigress. So during the time that when he asked back for the ring, she fought like a tigress, and if not believed that God had lodged a veto, then she would have been victorious. So very, very much, Miss Regina Olsen was really, really furious about what had happened. Kierkegaard wrote to Regina to ask her forgiveness and describe their farewell. She said that, "Promise to think of me." I did so. "Kiss me," she said. I did so, but without the passion. Merciful God. And we so parted and spent the whole night crying in bed. When the bonds were broken, my thoughts were these: either you throw yourself into the wildest kind of life, or else become absolutely religious. So, all his life, Kierkegaard was melancholy and withdrawn. Many entries in his diary or journals referred that even when others saw him as happy, he was actually crying inside. So, oh, he was crying inside. So, he went through those kinds of emotions and uh, felt that, believed that there was this belief that um, that if he indulges in such, the balance would be tipped over, like the dilemma that he had with having the desire of a love affair, and then also at the same time having a family, and losing the love affair. I mean, losing the sexuality and the desires of it versus the having the family. So it reminded me of K dramas. You know how Asian tough guys eventually had deep inside the feelings are kept and stuff. Now, in the later and early years, he was an outspoken critic of established church for its worldliness and in its insistence the acceptance of prescribed dogma. He said that the most meaningful relationship of God was purely a personal one that arrived through the individual's free choice, not with the ones whose nature and content are dictated by the church. Now, at this time, he is a student of, as a student, he rejected the Christianity and is a devout follower of Hegel. Later, the situation sort of reversed. Later in his life, the situation sort of reversed, and he rejected Hegel and embraced Christianity. But the way he perceived and accepted Christianity was more of not of the kind of institutionalized church, but rather in a personal note on it, or a personal religion. So, not following the whole. I don't know if you call it dogma, but I mean it's sort of a dogma, but a doctrine, but rather for it took it in a very personal level. He said that the most meaningful relationship with God is the personal one. So he took it in a personal level and arrived through the individual's free choice and not for those with the nature that dictated by the church. So he was still against the church and its doctrines and all the beliefs and the rituals of it. However, he took the Christianity or the religion sort of on a personal note. Now, Kierkegaard died in November 11, 1855 at the age of 44. Religion as too rational and mechanical. In Kierkegaard's time, he was in the Lutheran Church, which was an official church in Denmark. The state considered it as a duty to protect and promote Lutheranism, which it did by requiring a training in all schools, by elevating the clergy to the status of civil servants. So now, he saw that it was, he saw the influence of the church and the government sort of like enmeshed together, and sort of have wasn't really separated, but rather meshed with the system. So he find it very awkward. At the same time, find it probably unjust or so, like it was taking advantage of when it should be separated into two systems. Now, the ultimate state of being for Kierkegaard was arrived when the individual decides to embrace God and takes God's existence of faith, without the needing of logical and rational scientific explanation of why and how the decisions were determined. Kierkegaard was deeply concerned that too many Christians, rather than having a true relationship with God, were just praying reflexively, accepting religious dogma rationally instead of allowing it to touch them emotionally. So for him, it was appalling. There were a lot of Christians who were just following without without understanding things, and just try to accept without questioning things and try to clarify things out. So for him, he doesn't really agree to those things. Um, the highest level of existence, according to him, as a religious stage. At this stage, people recognize and accept their freedom and to enter into a personal relationship with God. The nature of the relationship is not determined by convention or by generally accepted moral laws, but the nature of God by one's self-awareness. So probably in these times, Kierkegaard witnessed how religion was used in a way that it interfered with government, perhaps, or interfered with the system, that it took advantage of everything within its grasp, whatever it can influence. And then he also saw people or observed people that wasn't really taking it in a very spiritual matter, but rather in a very reflexive, so very mechanical, very routinary, perhaps, I guess, in taking things in, but not really understanding the whole concept of religion and God. People exist on this level, see possibilities in life other than run contrary to what generally accepted, and therefore they tend to be nonconformist. So he ultimately rejected Hegel's philosophy because it places too much emphasis on logical and rational and not enough on the rational and emotional side of human nature. For the same reason, Kierkegaard rejected science as too mechanistic. He thought it prevents us from viewing humans, human beings, as emotional and choosing beings. So he has a point there. Like, it's not too much science, and the faith is, the religion is also not to be used as for like a dogmatic reason or for a mechanistic way. So it really, in this perspective, I sort of agree on how things, because I get to see, in reality, you get to see it happening these days. Now, others might find him as more of theologian than philosophers. At the later years, Freud made use of the concept and explaining it through the addiction and self-sabotage and repeated abuse. Now, his philosophy is more of theistic and very Christian, basically. His philosophy tends to be very individualistic also. He was giving more of the indirect communications through metaphors, ironies, and even through sarcasm. So that's why perhaps some of the philosophies or writings weren't really comprehended that much, because it was very hard to, whether he was doing sarcasm or he was doing all of those metaphors that he was explaining. Now, he also was he also added the objective and subjective truth. Objective truth, which is you can see it in the physical form, and subjective truth, which you can add your subjective perspective on it. A desire for what we fear and the fear for what we desire. So it's more of the saying that sometimes we desire for what we fear. However, our fear stops us from our desire to be fully recognized. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in the later years, that it made sense, in a sense that as human beings we have the tendency to be self-destructive. An example of this is perhaps when you walk, the fear of heights. When you're on the top of a building or walking in a very high part, tall, high places where there's no boundaries in it. The fear there is not just you might be falling down, but you have the capacity to jump the tendency or the capacity to jump and then destroy yourself or kill yourself. So the fear there for him, and in this particular perspective, is your capacity to do so, to do harm, you know, of jumping off that tall building or height and then hurt yourself or annihilate yourself. And also the fear of things might to come, or things might come or might happen. So it's more of the thing there is more innately that humans are capable of self-destructive behaviors or self-destruction. So it was emphasized later in the Freud's era, or in Freud, by explaining it that there are some in that context, the concept that we are indeed capable of such, like for instance, like addiction, and self-destructive behaviors, or repeated abuse, or helplessness, or prone to be once abused and prone to be abused, and wanted to be more abused and stuff like that. So it was emphasized later in the works of Freud, in explaining to those things, that human beings innately had the capacity to destroy themselves. Now, to have a recap, his works were like a powerful defense of Christianity in an increasing secular world, a deep critic of ways we often fall short of genuinely religious life, which is a wealth of early psychological insights also. So he really did contribute to a lot also in the psychology perspective, an inspiration of springboard for the entire existentialist movement. So he was the grandfather of existentialist movement. Although, as mentioned earlier, that his theories or philosophy were very, very Christian, absolutely very Christian, and also very individualistic. And he uses it through metaphors or indirect communication. So that's where the sort of where the part where some things get lost in translation, I guess, perhaps, because it's more of metaphor, ironies, and sarcasms. So let's move to another proponent of existentialism, which was, I'm pretty sure the first challenge here is to pronounce his name. Okay, so as I went through and browsed, really went through a lot and browsed through different things, whether pronouncing it as German, English, or French. So what I've gone through was his name is Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche. Knee, your knee, and cha. So Nietzsche. Or, since it's a name, so it could be pronounced in different ways. One would be Friedrich Nietzsche. So tz, T-E. So I don't know if it's Chinese or he got that Chinese, but Nietzsche or Nietzsche. So let's start with commonly heard phrases. So his famous lines or commonly phrases, which I get to hear it from the song, was, "What does not kill you makes you stronger," or "What does not kill me makes me stronger," or "God is dead and we killed him." Yep, you get to hear this from songs, or I bet you heard them from songs, but it was this guy, Friedrich Nietzsche, who, with his prominent mustache, made those famous phrases. Now, it was the life in 1844. So, at the age of 24, Friedrich Nietzsche was born in October 15 year. Was the son of Lutheran ministry and the grandson of two clergymen. Nietzsche was 5 years old when his father died, and he grew up in a household consisting of a mother, sister, two maiden aunts, and his grandmother. So it tells us about that he really grew up in a dominant and all-female household. He was a model child with an excellent student, rather. By the time he was 10, he had written several plays and composed music. Wow, 10 years old. At the age of 14, he entered the famous Porta boarding school, where the religion was one of his best subjects. He also excelled in the studies of Greek and Roman literature. In 1864, he entered Bonn University, and expressed disgust for the beer drinking and carousing of his friends, or partying. Why would they use carousing or carousing? This is just basically partying with your friends, drinking, binging, and stuff like that. Party. So he wasn't really a fun dude to begin with as a student. He was accepted an offer from Basel University to teach classical philology. This was before he had received his doctorate degree. He taught Basel for 10 years before poor health forced his retirement at the age of 35. So his most influential books followed after his academic retirement. So, wow, talking about early, going to school early. So basically, he was like a prodigy child. Now, after he retired from that university, he went to a place called, we went to the Alps in Switzerland, called Silas Maria. There were, and of course, there were letters from his family that seemed to show that he had problems within his family, or problems while he was growing up. He wrote about, quoted, that I don't like my mother, and it was painful for me to hear my sister's voice, even to hear my sister's voice. So, also noted there that women kept rejecting him. So, there were issues personally, I guess, during the time when he was growing up. So, among his masterpieces, although during this times he made masterpieces, but his books never really took off. He really didn't took off. Okay, didn't sell basically, and he was only 44 years old until he had a mental breakdown. From 1880, Nietzsche became increasingly isolated from everyday life. In 1889, he collapsed in the street and was taken to an asylum. Medical opinions about his illness have always been divided, but the syphilitic infection and subsequent paresis are likely to have been among those determining factors of his breakdown. So among his work, he wrote a book, it's according to Samuel, he wrote the book The Birth of Tragedy in 1872, Human All Too Human in 1878, Gay Science in 1882. I wonder what how the word there was used, but I'm pretty sure it was happy science. Thus Spoke Zarathustra in 1883 and 1885. Beyond Good and Evil in 1886. Toward a Genealogy of Morals in 1887, and so on and so forth. Now, his death was precipitated by a horse he saw by the street who was beaten by his driver. Now, he ran over to the horse and embraced him, and shouting, "I understand you." Never recovered from then, and then died 11 years after. So, it was this moment here when he was like Um, when he approached the horse and hugged the horse and then talked to the horse. It was there was a very iconic moment there that sort of also one of his um, moments that could never be forgotten. Nietzsche died on August 25, 1900, 3 weeks before his 56th birthday. He was buried in his hometown cemetery church where his father had baptized him. So he went back home and now with this work, um, there was there were terms there that were very useful, like this a German term called cell. So, the word there is it's a German word. It's Selbstüberwindung, means self-overcoming and willpower. His philosophy was full of life and grandeur. So this is one of the words that he emphasized. That it's Selbstüberwindung. Next is Übermensch, meaning rises above circumstances during difficulties, rises up to whatever life throws at them. His work teaches us on how to become who we really are, meaning Superman, Übermensch. Now, he laid out 4 thought processes that he wanted to, or he placed an emphasis to. One is owning or own up to envy. Now, this means that he recognizes that the big part of life, yet the teachings of Christianity puts envy equal to shame, or when you have that feeling, it automatically gives us the meaning or the feeling of shame or an indication of evil. So when we have envy, we hide it from ourselves and others. Okay. However, for Nietzsche, there's nothing wrong with envy as long as we use it as a guide to what we really want. Every person, as we see envious, are indicators or signs of what we could eventually become. It could be potentially be you or what you're capable of, as one of those, when you envy somebody, you get to see yourself in it and your potential and your capabilities, that you can also become one. He was insisting that we should face up to our true desires and put up a heroic fight, which makes sense into that context. Like, envy isn't supposed to be guilty or to give feelings of guilt, but rather a motivation to fight for what you really like and what you really desire. So he placed it on that perspective. Another would be, which one of my favorite clips there, it's Pilate, is don't be a Christian. Okay. He resented Christianity from protecting people from envy. During those Roman days, there were slaves that lacked envy, and it calls them sklavenmoral, meaning slave morality. In the entire New Testament, there was only one person worth respecting, according to him. It was the Pilate, the Roman governor. Now, during this culture, there were like slaves, right? There were conquerors and all. So I wonder how he would look at Pinoys in this matter. Like, we carried this kind of culture and behavior of being indolent due to the influences of a Spanish era for about 300 years ago. So, yeah, we might be carrying Sclavian moral in it, or slave morality. He sees a hypocritical creed denouncing that what they wanted, but fight weak to fight for it. This in terms like there were instances like, you know, when people try to complain and revolt against it, and yet in the end they don't do anything about it. So they remain just ranting, complaining and stuff. So it does make sense also. But in this context, he blames the Christianity or being Christian to repress the feelings of envy. He pointed out that church turned Christian into the Christian, how church turned into the Christian value system. So there were different meanings of there were different meanings that he sort of understood things like sexlessness means turned into purity, the value of virginity and so on and so forth. So if you're sexless, you're very pure. If your weakness, it was turned into goodness. It's okay to be weak. It's good to be weak. Submission to people's one's hates turned into, want to guess? Forgiveness. So very true. It's a very Christian thing that sort of not being able to take revenge turned into forgiveness. Submission to people one's hate turned into obedience. So it was the other way around. So when you're submission to people one's hate, you're still obedient, and not being to take revenge turned into forgiveness. Now I get to see this now at this context of being a Filipino and the values that Filipinos have. So you get to see it, to see that rather.
I didn't understand that.
I'm sorry, Bixby. I didn't even ask for you. For him, it was a bitter denial for men. Sorry. Automatic. Bitter denial for men to not acknowledge those things, and then the church sort of, the values of the church sort of like turned those point into meaning into something else. Next, which is very, very well, we know that he doesn't really party and drink alcohol. So, and the third one that he stated was never drink alcohol. Never drink beer. So he never drank alcohol. He only drank water and milk. All right. I don't know if it's for his diet or so, but yeah, there had been two great narcotics in the European civilization. One is Christianity, according to him, and the second one is the alcohol. So he's really against the Christians and the alcohol, or the Christian value system and alcohol. He hated alcohol for the same reasons that he scorned Christianity. He wrote that, how little you know of human happiness, you comfortable people. The secret of a good life is to live dangerously. Now, these statements, how a little you know and you comfort, he does not, he seems to not like complacent people, perhaps, and then live dangerously. Probably is the first one to do YOLO perspective in the Renaissance era or this era. So now I'm beginning to think that he's on the YOLO mood. YOLO means you live only once. So, but the irony of having it without alcohol. So despite he wants people to live in the edge and dangerously without alcohol, that's pretty also ironic on the flip side. He said that to build cities on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. So, that notion. So, he wanted to live dangerously. So, but with no alcohol. So it really became my my issues. Like, you want to really live dangerously without alcohol. Okay, it's very ironic. And the fourth one is God is dead. Despite the reservations about Christianity, he believed that the end of the was nothing to share about religious beliefs. I mean, the end of Christianity is nothing to share about religious beliefs. Were false, but knew that they were very, very beneficial also. He realized that it was very, very beneficial in the sense of helping people cope in terms of problems in life. So despite his um, arguments, he also saw the value of Christianity on giving hope to cope problems in life. He believed that the gap left by religion, because there was a gap, was supposed to be filled with philosophy, culture, music, art, literature, and should be replaced. The scripture should be replaced with culture. Okay, the scriptures of the church should be replaced with, culture. However, he was suspicious in his own era that how it handled the culture part. He believed that universities were killing the humanities and turning them into a dry academic exercises rather than using them from all they are meant to be. So, I guess he's more of an action type of guy, like wants it on very application rather than keep on talking about it and the philosophy of it or writing, just talking about it. He admired past teachings like the Greek. So, as we all know, he really was into Greek. He studied it and showed drama, which is applicable in a way of, the showing of drama was a bit of therapeutic also. Like all other eras, it faces difficulty, as he predicted that. So he was trying to predict two things in the future, that the dilemma or the problem that would arise. One would be mass democracy, which is pent up envy, the feelings of envy. Eventually, each each individual in a cumulative way would blow up and then have this mass democracy or pent up envy. Second one would be atheism, and he believed that two, which was coming to this new era, should be faced. Did it really? Right. So I'd like to add a nutshell so that we won't have a really, really bad note about, about how Nietzsche was living his life and how he perceived things. Although it makes sense, though, both Nietzsche and Kierkegaard was perceiving or perceiving in that era. It was very, from the earlier report that I have about humanism. It's still very influential in the sense that influential coming from the religion or the churches, that it sort of influenced not only within how people behave, but rather how people behave, and also influence the systems of governing things. So let's see on the brighter side of what we can learn from this. So in a nutshell, one should be harmonious totality. So that's what he wanted to have a harmonious totality. This meant that there are two sides. He also has this explanation of two sides: Apollonian side, which includes rational, organized, conscious, responsible, or logical, and the Dionysian side, which was instinctual, artistic, subconscious, creative, emotional perspective of life. Apollo Apollo was the sun god. He carried a bow, was shooting arrows of fires and brimstone. So he was a sun god who was very rational, organized, and very, that kind of demigod. While Dionysian was the opposite one. He was a drunkard. He was all to partying and stuff. So for him, it meant, for Asians to understand easily, for him it was the yin and yang, the yin and the yang, that it should be balanced, and neither of those parts should be denied as human beings. Now it was more to balance two sides, the duality of the two demigods, more like the yin and yang in Asia, or Asians. It shouldn't be fought against the duality, but rather use it in a balanced manner or in an advantageous manner. Next is avoid having reactive life. It says that most humans distract their thoughts to cease to be aware of life. Cease to be aware of life, and for him, it's too passive, too reactive. We do not act ourselves. We are not honest enough, then we're not noble enough either. So, Nietzsche invites you to be honest with yourself, more reflective about the goals, and brave enough to face reality. And instead of, backing up, to head on and fight obstacles from getting what you really want in life, which makes sense also. According to Nietzsche, the worst thing that you can do is distract yourself with meaningless activities and wait for your life to happen to you. We are all afraid of reaching the heights of what we're capable of and justify what we keep on lying to ourselves by saying things that you justify yourself. Like, nah, don't have enough money, or nah, she's out of my league, or nah, things that we can rationalize to stop us from becoming or reaching that goals. And then the rest, on the lighter note, avoid on holding on resentments. Don't blindly follow the masters. Find your way in life. Suffering can make you stronger. Avoid just being busy. Live dangerously. Become superhuman. Happiness is the way to approach your goals. So most of his teachings was basically make sense in life, and that's about it. I thought it was shorter, but it was still longer, almost 1 hour. So I hope everything is understood, and till the next report then. Thank you.